We're joined by Mike Prejean. He's a senior Middle East analyst, a former U.S. military intelligence officer, and former advisor to U.S. CENTCOM. And we have IDF Reserve Major General GADI SHAMNI. He's a former Israeli military attaché to the United States and former head of IDF Central Command. So we'll get both your thoughts on this, gentlemen. But Mike, I'll throw this to you first. And again, GADI, happy to get you to chime in on any responses you want to give here. Well, look, let's start with the big picture. You know, the U.S. has announced a blockade, a dramatic event here. Iran is doubling down, tripling down, may it be that there will be no such thing. What do you expect now?
Well, thanks for having me. I think the blockade says a lot, right? So far, you know, the U.S. is occupying the Strait of Hormuz. They are doing mine clearing operations, and there have been no attacks on U.S. Navy vessels. There have been attacks on Bahrain with drones. So we're seeing the regime lash out at our Gulf allies, but not lash out at us. So that's this fragile ceasefire that's holding right now. And I've said repeatedly, it will only hold as long as President Trump is willing to deal with Iran's violations of it.
If you want to add anything to that, GADI, what do you expect to happen right now? And I guess add to that, how involved is Israel in whatever's taking place around the Hormuz?
Well, I think that what we see now is, I call it the strategic patience of the United States. You know, the U.S. is a world superpower and can allow itself to hold back, to seize attacks and give a chance to negotiations. You know, for Israel now, for the IDF, it's a time for strategic readiness. The IDF is currently in a phase of strategic preparation, active waiting. The IDF is using this time to conduct rigorous after-action reviews, replenish stockpiles, maintain the platforms that worked so hard in the last 2 weeks, attacking in Iran and Lebanon and all over, and build up a precise, up-to-date intelligence picture for the case that fighting will be renewed. You know, for Israel, the Israeli position is on the nuclear issues. It's absolute. Any agreement that allows this current Iranian regime to retain this stockpile of enriched uranium will be considered a total dangerous failure. And I think that the President Trump is very determined. He keeps repeating it, and I believe that he will keep his word. But, you know, we cannot allow this world's leading state sponsor of terrorism and to remain on the threshold of nuclear capability, especially now when you have such a problematic regime. You know, the people that took over are the Revolutionary Guard, you know.
Yeah.
And they're
could be
much
described,
more extreme.
right?
Yeah.
A military, it could be more of a described as a military sort of totalitarian system at this point versus perhaps theological, right?
Yeah.
Look, Mike, I want to bring you into this as well in terms of there's at least effort right now to get a second round of talks. We're in almost a week into what was supposed to be a 2-week ceasefire. You know, how do those two things fit together? Do you think we're likely to see more direct negotiating, perhaps in Islamabad again?
Well, we have to remember that the ceasefire only came about because Pakistan said that Iran, in good faith, would open the Strait of Hormuz. They did not do that. So there was a violation right from the get-go. I think the ceasefire negotiation is designed to fail. If you look at Iran's red lines and you look at our red lines, there's no way to reconcile those. We have to ensure that we don't back down. The regime is used to getting concessions from U.S. administrations by being provocative, you know, by turning up the volume, turning up the heat with their proxies in order to get concessions from the West, primarily the U.S. That hasn't happened here. That's a good thing. The United States appears to be throwing away the playbook, throwing away Iran's playbook. And this move here, we have to remember they started moving into the Strait of Hormuz while the negotiations were ongoing. The talks were ongoing. There were already signs that they were going to collapse. We're supposed to have another round of talks on Thursday. I think the regime now knows it has to come to the table and give up something in order to continue these conversations. If that doesn't happen, then I don't see anything really coming out of this other than the resumption of military operations. The regime back home, right, the IRGC, is now calling the shots. We know that the team that was sent to Islamabad didn't have the authority to make a deal. They were just testing the water, seeing what they could get away with. When we look back at the regime, what's left of it, it's basically three levels down now, right? We've taken out the first string, the second string, and the third string quarterbacks, so to speak, and now we're dealing with the others, and we're seeing schisms. There's competition. This mosaic strategy to fracture the IRGC into these disparate IRGC cells to protect provinces. There's an advantage there. There's an advantage to take advantage of those competitive IRGC officers who don't like that the regime is even talking to us, meaning the political wing of the regime. So there's a lot of things to take advantage of here. I think, the Houthis are kind of, calibrating what they should do here because we have the capabilities to just decimate the Houthis along with the Israelis. So when you look at Iran asking its proxy networks to do more, there is hesitation because their benefactor has been decimated. It's running out of money, and that oil needs to get out for Iran's sake more than it does for anybody else. They have oil production facilities that are about to spoil because they only have a lifespan of about 22 days once they're moved into that final stage to get put on a tanker. And they're starting to have water develop in the bottom of those, starting to spoil that oil and gas. So that's a huge impact on their economy. And I think when they come to the table Thursday, they'll come to the table a little bit more willing to give something. But again, if they concede on anything, the regime collapses. If they stop supporting their proxies, the regime collapses. If they give up their nuclear program, the regime collapses. So these asks that we have are designed for the regime to collapse.
Gadi, at the same time, while we're reading and parsing every word, said by the leaders, the two sides of this, call it negotiation, U.S. military assets are still streaming into the region here. We know warships are coming in, replenishing stockpiles of missiles, even some reports indicating more ground troops being brought into the region. Does that say more, perhaps? Should we be paying attention more to that than what they're saying in the press?
Well, I think that a few days ago, the U.S. had the amount of force that was enough for, I would say, focused operation. I think that the force buildup that continues will enable a much larger ground operation if a decision will be taken. I'm not sure that it will deliver the outcomes that we would like to, but at the end of the day, I'm sure that an agreement should be reached. I have a feeling that at some point the Iranians will come to the table and make concessions. And as was said, at the end of the day, if this regime stays in place, we have a problem. But the Hormuz Strait that is a very very important strategic card that the Iranians are playing with. This leverage will be weakened in the long term because I think that the world is already looking for alternatives, and I think that the Iranians understand it. I mean, there is a limit to the time that they can drag this issue. And we will see what happens. I think that President Trump is very serious. That's why CENTCOM continues to build forces over there. And we might see, if this negotiation will not work out, we might see some ground operations that will put more pressure. It will not bring the Iranians to capitulation, but it will probably put a lot more pressure. The only thing is to make sure that you don't cross this watershed where you watershed line where you start to damage and to piss off the Iranian population. They're still in our side, still I'm saying, but it's very fragile.
Mike, as we've been discussing here in a bit, you frame this somewhat, but are we watching, what many would say was a battle between the Iranian regime's ability to withstand the attacks, withstand the punishment, versus the political will inside the United States for this? Because I don't think there's a question militarily, obviously, which side is stronger by any means. Which do you see running out first?
Well, we've had some recent polling in the United States that shows strong support for finishing the job. While this may not be popular, when the question is posed, should the regime in Iran survive? Polling says no. Should the operations end with this regime in place? Polling says no. So there are strong indicators. And again, the president said, I looked at the polling numbers, it was 25% support for this, but I felt like I had to do the right thing. Now, when it comes to the economy, the president's going to be able to say, and he's going to have, Wall Street and others support him here, is that this is actually good for U.S. oil and gas production. We are actually becoming the world's #1 exporter. We're taking 500 million gallons I'm sorry, 500 million barrels of oil and gas from Venezuela. And then you have 122 ships moving towards the United States. While at the same time, you have U.S. military transport planes moving to the region. So this may have been a pause for us to regroup, refit, rearm for a follow-on mission. I'm a former member of the 82nd Airborne Division, so I know what that regiment means. That means that it can go anywhere in the country, which makes the IRGC have to look at key terrain and high value places for them to say, we got to protect this. But they learn now with this the pilot rescue, that all we need is a flat surface to be able to land C-130s and bring in follow-on forces. So it puts them in a position where they have to start looking at key terrain deep inside Iran to protect. And as they do that, it gives the Israelis and us, through our ISR capabilities, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities, to see them move, and also to see these fractures and these disagreements. This mosaic strategy led to launching missiles at Qatar and Oman, which effectively acted as Iran's divorce attorneys, this whole thing. And then also launching towards Turkey. So there are a lot of things to exploit here. The main thing here is Americans see that we're going in, we're doing this. We're not losing Americans. We've lost, 13. We have injured Americans, but they understand that. What we want to avoid, like the general said, is this major threshold event. What if the Iranians get lucky and hit a U.S. Navy ship and kill a bunch of sailors? What is the appetite then? Remember, the terrorists only have to be right one time. We have to be right 100 times to make sure this doesn't happen. So there's a lot of things going in there, but I think that that this is designed not only to pressure Iran, but to pressure China to be pragmatic. China is very pragmatic and strategic. Will they push Tehran to say, listen, stop it, open this up, let's live to survive another day, let's make concessions? Because at the end of the day, Russia and China do not want the Islamic Republic of Iran to have a nuclear weapon. They've always just wanted the threat of that so that it could open up its economy and have sanctions lifted if it retreated from that goal, so that everybody could pour into Iran's economy. But China knows better than anyone. You can't float a $400 billion economy that exports terrorism. So I think China's a key play here, and that Trump is banking on China being pragmatic and strategic here and putting a lot of pressure on Tehran.
Right. I mean, some of these reports that China would be even considering shipping more advanced weaponry to Iran. I think that's a hard thing to imagine in this moment, in terms of the pragmatism of China on display. Gadi, the Gulf allies, and we're talking about the region here a bit, and we touched on this. The Gulf countries right now, how supportive, as far as we can tell, let's just put it this way, they are still supportive, yet apprehensive for renewed attacks. But it appears that they're committed to continuing to weaken or even topple the Iranian regime.
Well, the Gulf states, they will be very happy if the Iranian regime will disappear. But they are very cautious. That's why we see a lot of hesitation in their reaction. They absorbed so much fire and hardly reacted at all. So they're afraid. They're afraid that the U.S. will leave the area and they will stay alone with Iran to deal with Iran. So they're very cautious. I think that they fully understand that they should have changed their politics. They should have changed their attitude towards Iran long ago, but they're stuck now at a point that they didn't start this war. They didn't want this war. Probably they were surprised. They are not sure that a victory, a total victory, will be achieved. That's why they're very, very cautious. I mean, it's really hard to forecast how things will develop. We know that Iran will do everything that is within its power in order to push the American presence out of the Gulf. I'm sure it will not happen, but it's a very challenging issue because if you have a big U.S. base in your country, you would think that you are protected. And here they suffered from so much missiles, so many missiles and drones and so forth. So it puts them in a great dilemma right now.
Mike, I'll bring that back to you in terms of the pressure mounting on President Trump. I mean, the regime, and you mentioned this, has clearly found a potentially powerful lever in Hormuz. Okay, but how immune does President Trump appear to be to this mounting international pressure?
Well, we're seeing new NATO allies, right? The new Europe, the Romanians, other groups that are actually willing to allow us to use their airspace. We're seeing our Gulf allies like Bahrain and the UAE step up. But I would just say that there are a couple of Gulf countries, one in particular, that does not want the regime to go away, and that would be Qatar. And Qatar, if the regime goes away, Qatar becomes the natural next state sponsor of terror. You have to look at what Qatar's doing. So that's why when Iran hit them, it really surprised me. But it goes to your question or your point about the bases. We have to reevaluate whether or not we need a base in Qatar because we can't use it. We had to evacuate it, and it became a target.
The largest in the region, we should mention, the largest foreign base in the region for the U.S.
The base in Iraq we can't use because the Shia militias don't want us using that base to protect Israel or hit them. So I think the president here, this is going to be good for the U.S. economy, bad for the U.S. consumer at the gas tank for now. But, as those oil tankers start taking more U.S. oil, and Saudi Arabia, we have to mention Saudi Arabia, they offered $1 trillion in investment. They're out Qataring the Qataris with giving money to President Trump, right? And they've also opened that east-west oil pipeline. They say that they want to make it go through Israel, and they want to sign on to the Abraham Accords. So that's huge, but the president needs to hold Mohammed bin Salman to that standard. So there's a lot of things that can come out of this. I think the president is pragmatic. Despite the post on Twitter, that's designed to anger the press. That's designed to send a message to Tehran. But I think here we're seeing a president with political capital to do this, and you can't extend it. You got to go all in for a short term in order to be successful. If you extend it, you start turning into the forever war narratives that so many Americans are tired of. But we have to do this right, or we're going to have to do it again, unfortunately.
No, and I happen to think that, no matter how President Trump packaged this, messaged it ahead of time to, let's say, the Democrats, European allies, I'm not sure there was any way he was going to get them on board with what he's doing. So, he's going to be dealing with that kind of pressure. I have to bring Lebanon into the discussion here, gentlemen, for us. And Gadi, if you can take this on first. There's a fight against Hezbollah, and it's continuing, despite, the temporary pause against Iran. Many in the West seem to blame Israel for simply wanting to derail the ceasefire. I'd argue there's not enough attention on the fact that we're, talking with the Beirut government, diplomacy, fighting only against the Iranian-funded armed terror organization Hezbollah that has hijacked the Lebanese state. How dangerous is this misperception, that Israel is the rogue warmonger right now?
Well, it's very dangerous, and at the same time, it will not change the Israeli course, because Hezbollah is a huge threat to Israel and to our northern border. And we were lucky that during the huge fiasco that we had in October 7th, Hezbollah didn't join Hamas. Because we would have.
It's hard to even imagine, right? It's potentially disastrous if they had truly been coordinated, right?
We were just lucky, and at that time, after bringing our reserve troops, the IDF didn't do what he should have done then, and move forward in order to protect. Instead, we evacuated our villages, the towns, the cities along the border, and people were displaced for a year and a half. So this is something that cannot return. And the good thing, one of the good things about this ceasefire now with Iran is that Lebanon became our primary combat arena. While, as you said, maintaining some strategic constraints regarding strikes on Beirut, but Israel continues to carry out massive systematic strikes to dismantle Hezbollah's military infrastructure. Now, until now, we have achieved a critical shift on the ground by moving forward in about 8 to 10 kilometers, and the northern settlements are no longer within the range of the direct fire or immediate threat of a cross-border ground invasion, but that's not enough. It cannot stop the rocket fire. Hezbollah continues to fire rockets, and this is a reality that no sovereign nation can accept. So I think that the diplomatic channel that will start today in Washington, D.C. is so important. Yeah. It's so important because we have the Lebanese government. The Lebanese government can do more, must do more, but needs the support and the push and of the international community, the U.S., France, Israel.
It's a good question.
We all need to help them.
It's a good question. If they can do more, do they need to do more? Yes, but yes, I think it's been a great move by Israel to engage directly with Beirut. Yeah,
they can do more. Believe me, I believe that they can do more. They're afraid. They're afraid from civil war. They have this scar on the skin, but they have to do it.
Mike, I want to get your thoughts on this too, Mike. I'm really intrigued to hear your thoughts on this misperception, as I frame it, that in the West, largely in the West, that Israel's the rogue actor right now in the Lebanon front, and also on top of that, the chances of truly isolating Hezbollah for the first time. There's ties with Beirut now. There's ties with Damascus, in Jerusalem. Give me your thoughts on what's going on there, Mike.
Yeah, this is what we were hoping would come about, where we would actually be able to say that if Hezbollah's weakened, the Lebanese armed forces would be able to do something, but we haven't seen that yet. Yeah. But we have seen political willingness to meet in D.C. To talk about this, and that's a big thing here. This is Israel protecting itself, but also helping the Lebanese government deal with a foreign terrorist organization. I'm still a little leery of al-Shara in Syria, a former al-Qaeda leader. I understand that Hezbollah is a mutual enemy of Jalani and Israel, but still, al-Shara, his guys have sights set on Jerusalem as well. So we have to always be aware of that. But, I like that Rubio's part of this. I like that this is a negotiation with Rubio and not with Witkoff and Jared Kushner. It needs to be Rubio. It needs to be President Trump's guy that actually understands this. And I think that'll be a good thing.
truly enjoyed the conversation with you, Mike Breugent and GADI Shamni. And from one member of the service here to both of you, thank you for your service over the year in your respective arenas and for your time on the program today. Really enlightening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I promise not
Thank
to
you.
wear this shirt again. I don't know why I did this.
Airborne.
Good to have you. Good to have you. Mike. Thank you,
Airborne,
GADI.
airborne, sir. Thank you, General.
Thank you.